I see Louisiana has the Ten Commandments in the schools, right? And so that's interesting that that's now by law. It looks like Louisiana will have the Ten Commandments displayed. I even see that Texas, where I live, it says that they're going to have the Ten Commandments displayed in schools. Let me tell you what's crazy. Let me tell you what's crazy. So I have had beef with religion since the age of 25 when I realized that my beliefs were due to a variety of reasons that weren't necessarily authentic and genuine. It was more so because I grew up culturally within a religious belief system, then I subscribed to it, and I saw no reason to challenge it because nobody around me was challenging it except an exceptional rare few. And and then also it was wishful thinking. I wanted to believe that there was a supreme being because I wanted to believe that there was an afterlife because I needed to believe that there was something more after this, especially how life is so intrinsically and tragically unfair to many, many, many people, even if it's not unfair to me. And so I needed it. I wanted it. It wasn't necessarily authentic. And then when I had a very, very, very brutally honest conversation with myself as to whether or not I really truly believed in supreme being, the answer was I want to and not that I do. If you don't see that distinction, I recommend that you try to, well, look, if you don't see the difference between I want to versus I really do, then I don't know what to tell you. That being said, but when it comes to the Ten Commandments being displayed in schools, what's wild is if you would have asked me then, I would have been like, man, all this religiosity and all this stuff and in the brainwashing and they're not really following the precepts. What's wild is, again, I don't subscribe to Christianity, but I still see the merit in the spirit of Christianity in its most idealized form, in its best form, in its best presentation. Rarely do I hear anybody of a cut from a Christian cloth speak to the scriptures that have spoken to me, and nor do they necessarily. I rarely ever see Christians. I'm sorry, I don't truly walk a path that is Christ-like. I don't. There's a huge portion of people in this country that are so discriminatory and hate-filled and bitter. They're not loving their neighbor as themselves. They're not worried about the spirit of it all. And they idolize political figures. They worship human beings. They place human beings at the top of concern. They're material worshipers. And they're whitewashed tombs with dead man's bones inside, as the scripture says, as Jesus told the Pharisees and Sadducees. So I'm not impressed with the spirit of Christianity in this country by anybody in terms of generically speaking. What's crazy though is that I look at there being such a profound spiritual deficit in this country that I'm damn near okay with the Ten Commandments being in schools. If for nothing else, as a symbol of spirituality, of a possibility of spirituality. That's what sucks about that is people will take that and run with it, because then what people have used scripture for, what they have used the Bible for, is for self-serving persecution, for self-serving discriminatory patterns. They have weaponized it. They have weaponized it. It hasn't been for the sake of like really having people. When a rich man came up to Jesus and asked Jesus, what more can I do? Jesus told the rich man to sell all his belongings, and the rich man went away sad. Jesus said it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter into heaven. My point is, there's plenty of people in this country that are claimed practitioners of Christianity who worship at the altar of richness, they worship at the altar of celebrity. They worship at the altar of power and possession and just wealth. And it's so contrary and it's so antithetical to the actual spirit of Christianity. And it's not that, again, Christianity isn't this perfect thing, because again, I argue that it was written by human beings that had good intentions, because I would argue that there is, unless this is what's messed up. This is what's messed up. I don't believe. This is what I believe. I believe that every human being has a capacity for that spiritual dimension for them to be opened up. I think we all have a spiritual door that we don't tend to walk in through, and as a result of that, the vehicle through which that spiritual door tends to be opened or tends to be entered upon is through your generic commercial organized religions or religion itself, or through documents like the Bible. Because people, it's very unlikely, I'll even just speak for myself, if I had not grown up in a religious circumstance, if it was completely secular, I don't think, based upon my nature and my inclinations and just I don't think I would have accessed that spiritual door inside of me. It was through the vehicle of Christianity that I was able to sort of enter to a state. And I think spirituality is a bit of a state of being, just like lovingness is a state of being, just like hatefulness is a state of being, just like sadness is a state of being, just like ambitious can be like a state of being, just like a will to like succeed. I think a state of spirituality is one that is indifferent for moments at a time, if not for like forever, even though it's not a light switch. I think the spiritual mode is that which is indifferent to material possessions. It's indifferent to attachment to things. It's indifferent to wanting just stuff. It has an interest in kindness and consideration and connectedness, and it tends to be satisfied with just being. That is what a spiritual state tends to be. And I'm like, there's definitely more to it, but it's also, I think, what the fear is too. When I've been in a spiritual state, it can seem like an affectation, because when you're really, really, really immersed in it, I call it holy man phobia, because I'm scared, because I notice a distinct difference in my behavior and my interests, and it's very contrary to everybody else. When I'm fully immersed in that spiritual state, I don't care about the nonsense they're talking about, and I don't care about worldly concerns and worldly interests. I don't care about the drama and the nonsense. I just let's just I care about a peacefulness, a kind of like a natural organic momentum. I know then somebody slaps you on the head and says, "Hey man, this world is all about this and that and that and this," and it's all things that are very much so hostile to the spiritual mode, which is why there's such a spiritual deficit. But that's why the spiritual mode, just like a state of fit, just like being fit is also a state of being once you pursue. When you're young, you don't really appreciate this, but then as you get older and older, you realize to be fit is an achievement. To be in a spiritual state is an achievement, so you have to fight for it. To be healthy is something you have to fight for. To be spiritual is something you have to fight for. But it's kind of like, who's telling me how awesome I am for being spiritual? Nobody. So therefore, since there's no accolades, since there's no praise, we tend to not want to do it. Since it doesn't seem like it's worth it or valuable, since there's no social currency, so to speak, we're not really interested. But this spiritual deficit, I guess, is what I'm trying to get to, has all kinds of serious consequences as a result. Due to the spiritual deficit, what we're seeing is a lot of, especially young people, they're just like, they're just giving into like debauchery and only debauchery. I'm a fan of debauchery, but it's strategic. It's part of a balanced lifestyle, part of a balanced breakfast, so to speak. And now that it's very inconsiderate, very mindless, very disrespectful, that spiritual realm can inform a lot of healthy behavior in a sense of community, even with complete strangers, because you're loving your neighbor as yourself, because you're looking, and then also the spiritual state, very much so, which is why everybody's full of it who claims they're a Christian. White and black Americans are so full of it. The spiritual mode has no interest in this. It has zero interest in your appearance. In fact, the spiritual mode request that you're modest in your appearance, and that you're not placing too much emphasis on your appearance, and that the spirit, the inside, the entire essence of the New Testament, the entire essence of it is begging you to be more concerned about the insides than the outside. And yet everybody that claims to be a Christian is so damn concerned with race, with color, with beauty, with ugliness. The shallowness is off the chain, and it spits in the face of Christianity. So my point is, the commandments, that's Old Testament stuff too, by the way, which is hilarious. That's also what's hilarious. the Old Testament, like to put emphasis on any kind of Old Testament elements, is to also be to not live up to the expectation that we're focused on what the New Testament was. The Old Testament is good for historical reasons if you're a Christian, but the New Testament should be what it's about. If anything, you should have passages and excerpts from Jesus's biblical teachings, from his teachings, as opposed to this emphasis on something that is obsolete in the eyes of your standard Christian, because like love your neighbor as yourself encapsulates everything that you could ever give a damn about, and anything that's worthwhile having as a Christian or as somebody who's spiritual. I digress, but my point is that we're so spiritually deficient, and that capacity to be spiritual is so neglected that I'm almost okay with it. I'd almost be okay with it if I knew that they're behind this, the people that claim they cared about this, if they were really trying to walk the path, really trying to walk a spiritual Christian path, if they really exhibited those behaviors where it wasn't about race, it wasn't about gender, it was about just everybody being treated right, it was about just like just the spirit of it all. If it wasn't about like just having stuff and accruing massive amounts of wealth and basing your credibility and your value off of that, our value systems do not align with actual Christian value systems. Therefore, we're bogus. That being said, we're so spiritually dry that I'm almost okay with it, just because it's like I'll take anything at this point, and which is wild. I'm not saying it's right, but what I have seen in these schools has been so wrong and so deficient of any depth that I'm almost okay with it. That's where we are. That's where we